Another exciting week down in baseball. And I have to say, looking at the standings right now after the last week, it's been you're starting to see the races really crystallize here as we move into the stretch. The divisions are kind of set with the teams in place for what they're going to be competing for. And we really only have a couple tried and true division races this year. There's a few of them that have sort of already been either put away or somebody's sort of winning through the others' incompetence.
So we just came back from a very early Peacock game. Peacock Network carries the games at 12:05 here on Sunday, and we were already back from the game in the late afternoon on Sunday, so the Sunday games are still being played, and we got to see Shohei Ohtani play baseball in person for the first time, and I really wanted to see him pitch, but I was happy at least that we got to see him hit.
Yes, and as Met fans, we were very happy to see him not hit at all today as he went 0 for 4 with 2 strikeouts.
Yes. Now, Met pitcher David Peterson thing, I don't know what all the fuss is about Shohei Ohtani. I had no problem with the guy.
But it was a series that showcased pretty much the ineptitude of these two teams and why neither one of them will be making the playoffs this season.
Yeah, and that division where the Angels play, had they even managed to stay closer to 500, and obviously they went it all in at the trade deadline. The Mariners run now have taken them 22-15. I think takes them to tied for first place.
They're as of this morning, so without looking at Sunday's sort of game results, they were tied for first place with the Texas Rangers. And I think the AL West is certainly the most exciting race in baseball because it's really the only 3-team race.
Right, and so that's what made it more tough for the Angels, right? Because you got the Astros in third place, and if you look at the wild card in the American League right now, the Rays seem to have a decent lead in that overall, but the Astros and Rangers are virtually tied, so they would be in, but the Blue Jays are only a couple of games back, and the Red Sox, and I did this last week, right? The Red Sox
are hanging
around.
But
I don't see how they do it.
It's very interesting because if you look at these, so this week you've watched the Mariners finally catch the Rangers. They've got 9-1 over their last 10 games. But the only reason they've been able to catch the Rangers is because the Rangers have been equally inept in the same time the Mariners have been excellent, because I think the Rangers are like 2-8 in their last 10.
And Max Scherzer, former Met Max Scherzer, has pitched well enough for them, but I think it's just kind of interesting that as well as he could have pitched, he's not able to take the whole team and make the whole team, better at the same time.
And so you have to think right now, if the season ended today, both the Rangers and the Astros, who are not in the lead for the AL West, would be the other 2 wild card teams
besides the Rays. Right.
So both of them would make it in. If you look at the AL Central, nobody's making it in from that division. So
the Twins are so uninspiring. Only again, they go 5-5 for the 10 games going into today, but then the Guardians go 3-7. The Tigers are going to catch the Guardians pretty soon.
Right. So I think if you're looking at this right now, the playoff race is really going to come down to, is one of the other AL East teams besides the Rays able to catch a playoff spot, or are you going to see the other 2 AL West teams sort of just kind of get there based on nobody else being around to?
Well, I guess if they all played the Yankees, who occupy last place in the division by a fair margin now. In fact, and we Met fans have to live this one down too. So both the Yankees and the Mets are in last place, and at this stage in the season, hasn't happened in a long time. They have never finished the season, both of them in the last place at the same time. That is a distinct possibility this year.
That's a very good possibility this year. And I think it's just interesting that when you look at the AL, you had the Orioles, who I think were losing today. They were struggling a bit. I think they actually lost today already because the Rays were going to pick up a game if they finish up beating the Yankees. But I just think it's interesting that when you look at the AL playoff picture, it looks like the Orioles are the far and away the best team right now. They had another great week. They've clinched a winning season.
We said this last week, though. They basically have done about 8 or so wins better than expected by their run differential, and so you just think, okay, and they had a bad night. Batista, got lit up the other night, and that really erodes the confidence in their bullpen if Batista isn't as good as he's been all year.
Yeah, and there was a bunch of there's a little bit of chatter about his arm potentially not being 100%, which if he's not himself, that bullpen, which has been such a strength for them this year, is suddenly not. And I think that becomes very worrying if you're an Oriole.
And take it from these Met fans, playoffs equals bullpen. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have a bullpen that can really, shut down people, and that's how in the National League, the Phillies made a run to the National League pennant last year because their bullpen, as you said in a prior podcast, they went crazy. Everybody pitched great at the same time.
And I think it was a very interesting week in the AL because despite that Orioles team, who's just been unbelievable, they're 81-48. They've been fantastic recently. John Angelos was talking about how they might not be able to afford to keep all of this young homegrown talent that has finally powered them to an unbelievable season.
Well, that's all really part of the same ongoing negotiation about a stadium that Angelos and his family would like the city of Baltimore to build. And the city of Baltimore is like, well, hold on a second here. We're not going to give you everything you want. We did that already with Camden Yards. So I think this is all, and Angelos, he's kind of like Rob Manfred that way. When he opens his mouth, people are just shaking their head and going, I wish he'd just shut up.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what he's about. How about the National League?
Oh, wait, there's one more big story out of the American League, though. This is for unlike for a first-place team, this is for a scuttling team who is the only reason is not occupying the bottom of the AL Central. We
haven't talked about them in a while.
We haven't talked about them in a while. It's because of the Royals existing. But the White Sox dismissed Rick Hahn and Ken Williams from their duties this week in an unusual late-in-the-season firing for your front office staff.
And the only reason that Pedro Grifol didn't go is because they got rid of the guys that would have fired him.
Exactly. So, and they needed somebody there for the meantime. But I think
he's not going to make it through next year. Pedro Grifol won't be managing them next year.
And I think ultimately, if you're looking at the White Sox, I have to imagine White Sox fans saw this coming after what was for a team that seemed like was on the rise suddenly to fall apart the last couple of years.
That is a team to me that the individual parts should be a better sum than they do. It's like all these players that can play, they've got talent, they've got
and every move they seem to make didn't work.
So that's the mojo, and ever since they got rid of La Russa, there just really has, and not that La Russa was great
good.
shakes.
No,
there,
he was not helping.
But I just feel like they need a reset in that organization, and so by getting rid of Williams and Rick Hahn. Yeah, that's where they're headed.
And obviously, Shohei is done as a pitcher for this season. He has tore his UCL. He will be getting, I think, Tommy John in the offseason?
No, so he has the option, and this particular UCL thing can heal at times without surgery. So it has not yet been determined. So that's why he decided to hit the rest of the year, because they said you can't really injure it any more than you would already.
Yeah.
Hitting. So, and if you remember last year, Bryce Harper was out because of the Tommy John surgery and came back and DH'd at the beginning of this year and just started playing first base in the past month or something like that. So you can hit if you had surgery, and he's not even had surgery.
Right, but now you have to pretty much think, Eve, as a fan of baseball, that you will not see Ohtani as a pitcher next season, at least very much. It's unlikely.
I don't know. I would think that, yes, a UCL that's going to affect his ability to pitch, of course, with a contract at stake, too.
It's very interesting how this is going to impact his contract situation and what you're going to see, because it's going to lower his price, but not by that much, because the guy's still worth probably $40 million. It's just a hitter.
I think that's a good number right now. Now, we were talking, I had this crazy deal in my mind for Ohtani that was 7 years for $600 million, $75 million a year.
Now it'll be like seven for like $550.
And I think Eduardo Perez, who hosts the leadoff spot with Steve Phillips on Sirius, he was saying that the way that you could build a contract for Ohtani would be that you would build a contract where it'd be $40 million a year or $50 million a year, and you'd have, and maybe it's a 6-year deal or 7-year deal, and you have opt-outs for the player after year 2 and year 3 in his mind. And so what that gives Ohtani, if he's fine and he can do everything and he wants to go out and negotiate a better contract for himself,
he's able to.
So that's how the club would entice him to sign that kind of a deal.
Right, he might be able to get him a lower AAV because he knows, well, if I'm doing amazing, I can just opt out and get an even better deal. And then you front load the deal the first couple of years, so he's like, well, I'm still getting paid like I'm getting that $600 million deal I wanted.
And if you had to guess the 3 teams that you say will be in the running for Ohtani, there probably would be more than that, I would think. But
Dodgers, Mets will be in the running because they have money to spend. Mariners, I could see them taking a big run at him.
He likes Seattle. It's a lot of connection to that place. A lot of Japanese live in Seattle.
Would you want to go there if you're Ohtani and sort of follow an Ichiro?
Good team. You're 31 years old. You want to win.
Right. You're ready to win now.
And I'll say one more thing about Ohtani that I was thinking about going. Do you think he could be one of the first guys? So, Japanese players have played here, and now we've had some great ones finish their careers for the most part in the U.S. Is there a way that Ohtani plays here for another 5, 6, or 7 years and goes back and has another year in the Japan League at the end of his career?
Yes, but I think only once he's done competing for titles in America. Like, I would see that sort of being like he has his final season in the major leagues, and then he would go over.
Are you saying like he's 42 years old or something like that?
And then does a farewell tour in Japan as well. I could see that.
I kind of would think it would be revolutionary for him to go back when he still had gas left in the tank and play
I just don't see him doing that as long as he can compete for a World Series
But it interests
title.
me that I'd like us to get to a point where that could happen. Look, Japanese baseball is really good.
Oh, yeah.
And then hopefully this Yamamoto, who's going to be the next big free agent pitcher, he'll be that guy. All right, so the National League. I think the same thing that happened last week, right? The Braves and the Dodgers, they're far and away the two best teams. That hasn't changed. The big change for me, in my mind, this week is that the Giants, who had a pretty good run to get into second place, they go 3-7 for the week. The D-backs go 8-2, and they flip-flop. So now the D-backs are in second place in the West. Not that they're going to catch the Dodgers necessarily, but in the running for that wild card, the Phillies are in the number 1 slot, and then you've got the Cubs, the Reds, the D-backs, and the Giants all fighting for the other 2 spots.
So you've got a very fun wild card race in the NL that's kind of going down to who are going to make up the last 2 spots, because the top 4 spots in the NL are pretty more or less locked in at this point. I think you could even kind of argue that it's going to be the NL Central race might be the most interesting, because if either team stumbles a bit, or especially if both teams stumble
so glad you said that.
Down the stretch, that becomes a race where if you don't win it, you don't make the playoffs.
I think because I have so little trust in the Cubs being a first-place team to think that they're going to come back and win the division, but they're only 4 games behind Milwaukee. And Milwaukee could go on a losing streak.
That Milwaukee team could score like 1 run over a week's worth of games and drop a bunch.
And the Cubs have Dansby Swanson, and you may not think that much about Dansby Swanson, but I think he's a winning ball player. He played on those winning Brave teams, and I just think
that Cubs team has been a pesky team that has stuck around when everybody else has kind of fallen off throughout the year, especially in the Central, They've stuck around and continued to play good baseball. I think the question is, are they going to have the pitching down the stretch that they need to make this run?
They have really, in my mind, 1 pitcher, Justin Steele.
Right.
Okay. And then with Stroman being hurt and with all the stuff, there's always circus when there's Stroman involved.
But the thing with Stroman is Stroman could come back and have an unbelievable last 3 weeks to the season, and that could be the difference maker for them.
But we go back to our favorite Cub whipping boy, Kyle Hendricks, going, do you really
Father time caught up to
Do you really want to hand the ball to Kyle Hendricks when it means something?
And this isn't 2018 Kyle Hendricks or even 2016 Kyle Hendricks.
Then when you look at the Brewers pitching, Brandon Woodruff is back. That's just better.
It's just better.
But
the offense isn't.
No, well, the offense has been pretty, actually,
putrid.
It's been bad for years. This is not anything new this particular year.
And
the Cubs can score runs.
The Cubs can score, so it'll be very interesting to see how that. I'm curious to see how many games they play against each other down the stretch, because that could really end up being what determines it.
Well, there's only 13 games to remember playing,
right?
So teams are already done at this point with some of their rivals.
You could have 2 series left.
I don't know that. They're right. There could be 6 or 7 games left with those.
If there's 6 or 7 games left between the Cubs and the Brewers, that could get real exciting.
Yeah, we should have checked that for. And the Phillies just kind of, meander along. And
I don't think they've been meandering this month. They've crushed the ball this month. They've hit so many home runs.
They're hitting, but, record-wise, they've sort of won here, 1, 2 out of 3. They win series. All of a sudden, they got to being 13 games over 500 when they were, under 500 not all that long ago. So you're right. They've played really well. But I think they're doing it under the radar because they're so far behind the Braves.
Right. The Braves have just so already ran away with the division that, the Phillies playing a much better brand of baseball isn't noticed because they're just a wild card team.
And just to talk about the lower division teams, right? The Nationals, I think you were saying this before we got on. Number 1, they're not in last place, and I think we picked them for a last place team, a terrible team this year.
Everybody had them pegged as and this is something to bring up in another part of the discussion, is everybody had them pegged as a Royals Athletics bad tier team. Rockies, that kind of level of bad this season. And they're not. They've shown that they have some young, exciting prospects. They are a feisty, scrappy team that has played above what you would expect for them this season.
Right.
So I think if you're a National fan, you're happy because what you knew was a rebuild seems to be progressing smoothly so far.
You're not happy if you're a National fan. You want them to do something. What are we going to do with this team? Are we selling the team, or are we? That's
independent.
This is all window dressing, because if you don't have a plan, right, you don't have the right ownership. You're just okay, well, we didn't stink as bad as we thought we would. Isn't that great? How long can they take that to your fans before they start going, I had enough of this?
Considering you knew you were going into a major rebuild when you dumped Soto last season, you were never expecting.
Oh, great! We don't suck as bad as we thought.
Right, but that's a big deal because you could be the Athletics or the Royals right now.
Yeah, yeah. Or you could be, and the Pirates, who smartly, I think, didn't do anything late in the season to sort of, increase their prospects. They have like a worse record than the Mets, believe it or not.
I mean, you could go at this. Who would you rather be right now, the Nationals or the Mets?
The Nationals or the Mets? I still think the Mets have better players.
Right, but you're in that kind of argument where that's now a legitimate question, where that was not a question anybody was asking before the season.
And I like the Pirates with O'Neill Cruz on there next year, and add a pitcher here or there, and all of a sudden they're the Reds next year.
Right, and I just do think it is interesting that with this season you have the teams we expected to be in last place. You have teams like the Athletics, like the Royals, like the Rockies.
Right?
We knew those teams were going to be bad, but then the last place team in a bunch of other divisions or close to it are like you have the Mets, the Cardinals, and the Padres, and it's like
the Yankees.
And the Yankees. What are they doing down here?
And the Padres aren't in last place.
But that's mostly because they're playing in the division with the Rockies.
And we talked about that team last week on the podcast going, everybody looks at them going, how can they not be better?
Well, let's see. You go 6-20 in one-run games, and you don't win any games in extra innings.
They have lost all, I think, 11
or
extra inning games. That's unbelievable.
That's how you end up, with a 61-69 record, despite being a much better team than that.
Okay, so last couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
Does Shohei get to 50 home runs?
I mean, 6 home runs in a month isn't anything crazy. I think he's got a good shot at it.
I just worried about at some point they might decide to not play him. And I'm glad it wasn't today.
Here's the thing. The only person that's stopping Shohei from playing anymore this season is Shohei.
Right.
Because
it's his choice.
Right. Because the last thing the Angels are going to do is Shohei's not going to come to them and be like, I want to play. And the Angels are going to say no. And then he will be like, I will no longer. Okay, well, I'm not. That's my last game for you as a team. Because they'll just walk if they do anything to piss him off.
What percentage chance do you think that Shohei stays with the Angels?
15%.
Yeah, I'd say 10.
10-15%. It's low.
So yeah, well, we're coming down the stretch because when we do this next, it's going to be Labor Day, and you're really going to have that sort of view of the last 28, 30 games of the season.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a lot that could happen, though.
Oh yeah, and as we come, to a close on this season, we do just want to say thank you to all our listeners out there. Thank you for tuning in. We actually got a bunch of really nice messages this week.
So and one of the writers wrote in and he said, loved your podcast. I don't know if you guys take questions or it's like, yeah, of course we take questions. We should say it more often.
Right. Reach out to us through email. Reach out to us through Twitter. We appreciate all your support and thank you for all the subscribing. We're on YouTube. We're on a bunch of different platforms and just thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.